The final episode of Invincible Season 4 landed on Wednesday 22nd of April 2026, thus concluding this kind of holy trinity of violent action superhero TV shows landing on major streaming platforms on a Wednesday, consisting of Invincible, The Boys and Daredevil Born Again, each show marching to the beat of their own drum. And whilst it would be fairly insipid of me to run numerous cross comparisons between each of these shows, I will say that to me, Invincible wins the award for being the show that most definitely has improved with each passing season. I know not what the general masses think of this latest series now that it's all wrapped up, but I'm here just to tell you some of my thoughts, what I loved about this season, and why I think it had some of the best drama in Invincible so far. For the uninitiated, that complex family drama is one of the components that makes Invincible so unique, and they keep it in good balance alongside of the spectacular, almost B-movie sci-fi action, and of course, the blood-curdling violence. I would like to say that they use the violence sparingly, they don't tout it unnecessarily, but when it happens, you know about it. Before we get started, full disclosure, as much as I'd hate to disappoint some of you Invincible fans, I'm not going to be running any cross comparisons with the comics because I haven't read them, bar the first couple of issues. No beefs with the comics, they got a great art style and I'm looking forward to diving into them one day, but for now I have actively chosen to steer clear of the comics for the simple reason that I am so invested in the show, I don't want to skip ahead. I think the final episode of this season in particular exemplifies how, if you had already known the story from the comics, some of the surprises in that episode would have been, well, spoiled. So I'm glad for one that I took the journey completely blind to what was happening. So, like I said, no shade on the comics. I think I will get into them one day. I'm quite excited to do so, but it's going to be after the TV show finishes. Second thing I'm going to say is spoiler alert. If you haven't watched Invincible Season 4 and you want to watch it, then don't watch this. But then watch Season 4 and then come back and watch this so we can all chat about it together in the comment section. Let's go. So just a quick recap, Season 3 ended on a bloodbath. Let's face it, it was absolute carnage. The penultimate episode saw the return of Angstrom, vowing vengeance and bringing with him an army of evil Mark variants who pretty much obliterate planet Earth. And when that attack was repelled, the ruined battleground of our lovely small planet was visited by a particularly nasty Viltrumite named Conquest, a man so wicked and vicious that even other Viltrumites didn't really want to be around him, and that's saying something. And so Series 4 begins with Earth striving to pick itself back up and keep going. And the same goes from main man Mark Grayson, aka Invincible, and the rest of the Invincible family. And I really like how this first episode plays on the whole kicking our planet when it's down trope. Straight away we get multiple attacks from various people and establishments. You've got Dinosaurus and Universa, and those nasty little sequids finally pull the trigger on their plan to rule the surface. And when all of these respective threats are thwarted, you get this closure to the episode where Conquest, like that was going to hold him, escapes from his confinement and flies off into space, looking down vengefully upon planet Earth with his bum out. You gotta love Cecil's reaction to that. As much as I enjoyed this initially, I thought that trope was kind of getting a little tiresome by episode 3 because you still had more and more people coming to invade. You then had a very well-coordinated invasion at the hands of the Flaxons, and at this point I'm just thinking to myself, how many other loose ends from previous series are they going to try and tie up at this point? But I suppose that did in itself lead to something interesting going forward, because now we have Robot and Monster Girl trapped on the Flaxon planet, so it will be interesting to see where that goes. And any complaint I had that this show was getting repetitive should really have been squashed during episode 2, because episode 2 is a completely different ball game again. The beginning of episode 2 contains one of two lovely feel-good Viltrum flashbacks, and this one involves the Scourge virus and how it wiped out almost the entire population of Viltrumites. We know by this point that the Viltrumites are utterly evil, but the devastating loss of life depicted in this flashback can't help but evoke a certain sense of sorrow and, dare I say it, sympathy for these people. Some incredible imagery during this sequence, depressing on an epic scale. And it means that when the Viltrumites carry out their mission in the present day story, you know what motivates them. You know that they are driven by a sense of duty, revenge, but also despair. So besides all the stuff that's happening with Mark Grayson, there are two overarching storylines in this series. One involves the Grand Coalition of Planets, led by Viltrumite defector and inventor of the Scourge virus, Phadus, making motions to take the fight to the Viltrumites on their home turf. And the second is the long-awaited redemption story of Nolan Grayson, aka Omni-Man. Now, I'll be going into more detail about Nolan's redemption story soon enough, but for the opening segment of this plot line, it's done using the medium of comedy as he and his new bestie, Alan the Alien, visit various locations to pull on numerous resources they can use to fight the Viltrumites. As integral to the main story as this subplot is, I do kind of regard it as a bit of a pit stop before we get to the main bones and brains of this series. Speaking of which, we might as well talk a little bit about episode 4, Home. It's been a while since we've seen Damien Darkblood doing his thing, and this episode is solely set in the Underrealm and his fight with villainous forces therein, dumping on the audience a whole backstory about humanity's relationship with demons, which, well, does it fit into the larger tapestry of Invincible? I'm gonna say maybe. The characters are great. I love the scene where they're falling down the hole for ages and they have this completely pointless conversation, and yeah, you got Slayer blasting out the soundtrack, and of course the one and only Mr. Bruce Campbell making his landing in the Invincible universe. Well, it's about time too. At the end, we've got Damien Darkblood making his return as a sort of earthbound detective. Excited to see where that goes in the future. So episode 5, I think we can all agree, was the big game changer of this series. The most obvious reason being that it contained round 2 of Conquest versus Invincible. Watching this fight reminded me of the scene in Fight Club where Edward Norton is beating up the blonde kid. Like the crowd in that Fight Club scene, I was whooping and cheering for Invincible until those cheers subsided to a kind of pale-faced stupor where, ironically, my stomach felt slightly wobbly. Good grief, they really ramped up the intense content for that one. So obviously that was a conversation starter for the fandom, and yes, it was disgustingly entertaining, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't my favourite part of this episode. My favourite part was right near the beginning, and so we get into a pivotal moment of Nolan's long-awaited redemption arc. So Nolan's been in the backdrop since the end of Series 1, but this is the first time he has actually physically attempted to make amends for all of those terrible things that he has done. This is the first time that Nolan has returned to Earth since the incident in Chicago. He attempts to rebuild some of the rapport he had with some of the characters that he had positive relationships with back when he was Omni-Man, Earth's golden champion, including Art the costume guy, who sits and has a beer with him, but when Nolan flies away, you realise that Art has been terrified for his life the entire time he's been sat with Nolan. And there's an equally great scene in the final episode where Nolan revisits the site where he beat his son up, and he's thinking about all those highly maniacal things that he said to Mark, at which point Cecil turns up and explains that he will never not be afraid of him. And like everybody else, as soon as Nolan tries to rebuild the bridges, all Cecil has to do is remind him of the numerous people that he brutally murdered in Chicago. Like, when I was capturing images preparing for this review, I went back and rewatched the train scene of Series 1, and it never ceases to remind you why, at that point in the show's life, it's just impossible to imagine how this guy could ever take a face turn and stop being a villain after all of those horrible things that he does to innocent people in that episode. And yet here he is. And whilst the audience may not find it in their hearts to forgive him, you can't fail to acknowledge that when he says sorry, he does mean it. And rebuilding the broken bridges of his family is a whole different affair. The first attempt he makes is with his son Mark, who he reacquainted with in Series 2 to a degree, and Mark is one that arguably Nolan mistreated the most, and yet, as would also be apparent with his younger son Oliver later on, rebuilding the bridges with his sons is comparatively easy compared to the conversations that he is going to have with Debbie. And this is the scene that completely blows my mind. Debbie is just the ultimate character as far as I'm concerned. I love this woman. She's super, super tough, headstrong, completely fierce and unfaltering in her conviction, and yet because she doesn't have any powers and because she's watched the sanctity of her family crumble apart in real time, she's taken on this ever-increasing sense of despair and vulnerability. Often she has turned to alcohol as a means of escape, and yet somehow she holds it together. Her love of her sons has gotten her through. But the pain that Nolan has caused her is completely unparalleled, and Nolan is about to find that out in the scene where he rings the doorbell. The pacing of this scene, the fact that there is no music, the fact that this wildly imaginative, explosive animation has been stripped down to just two adults talking in a living room, is done to an absolute fault. Nolan's apology, it's a good apology. He holds nobody else accountable but himself. He wholeheartedly explains his regret at what he did to Mark, at what he did to her, what he did to all of those people in Chicago. He lays it out in an extremely articulate fashion and gives probably the most heartfelt apology that a character such as Nolan could ever have the capacity to give. And yet Debbie is so hurt by his previous actions that she is not going to take this apology lightly. And one of the first things that she says to Nolan is, "Why are you still here?" And Nolan says, "Well, I came here to apologize." And she says, "You already did that." And then slowly Nolan's argument starts to fall apart. It slowly starts to emerge that really the problem here is that he is kind of seeking absolution solely for himself. And Debbie calls him out on this when it is her turn to speak. And as decent as his apology was, now comes the hard part: to shut up and listen. And he immediately starts to dig a massive hole for himself when Debbie calls him out on getting with another woman and having another child 2 months after he left her. And he says, "I didn't love her, I loved you," which was a really dumb thing to say and makes Debbie hate him even more. She ends up thumping him repeatedly in the chest. Both J.K. Simmons and Sandra Oh's acting during this scene is completely 5-star material. This scene is so stripped down that there is so little going on that it is completely down to the performance of the voice actors to put across the drama of this conversation between two adults attempting to reconcile. This is an incredible bit of television and one of my favourite scenes in the entire show. Debbie eventually tells Nolan to get out, and he does, but during that conversation he also acknowledges the fact that forgiveness needs to be earned and not begged for, and that brings us nicely to episode 6. So whilst Mark repairs himself, I really don't know how you come back from that, Nolan and Oliver have the opportunity to build a father-son relationship from the ground up. What with Nolan not being present through Oliver's young development, which has happened in rapid fashion. Now, I gotta be careful how I view this particular subplot because it involves a father coming back into a son's life, having not been present through that particular son's formative years, and that is not an experience that I can relate to, neither as a son nor a father. So I must acknowledge that this is probably a sensitive topic for a lot of people. It seems to me, from the outside looking in, that Nolan does a fairly admirable job of working hard to earn his son's trust. They bond through a series of activities and conversations and a bit of father-son rough and tumbling, where Oliver learns quite a bit from Nolan, but Nolan learns one or two things from Oliver too. You don't have to kill everything all the time, Nolan. And so this means that when Mark does awaken and the three Grayson fellas team together to repel a Viltrumite attack on the planet Telescria, that Nolan has earned the right to fight alongside of his sons. This is a face turn that you can see and feel, and the prospect of Nolan becoming a good guy alone would be meaningless if it wasn't for the journey he has taken to become that new, improved version of himself. And so episode 7 is the big epic showcase of Invincible. We get to the big battle, the grand spectacle, and the episode begins with another feel-good flashback trip to the planet Viltrum, and this one involves the Great Purge. This is Grand Regent Frag. How do we establish that Frag is as ruthless a Viltrumite as they come? By this, of course, when he assumes position of Grand Regent, the first order he declares is to purge any weakness among Viltrumite kind, and so he has Viltrumite turning on Viltrumite. We already knew about the Great Purge from when Nolan explained it to Mark in Series 1, but that was a quick trip, whereas this is a slow burning montage of brutality and carnage where only the strongest survive. It's a flipping bloodbath, and even the little kids get involved. Naturally, Conquest enjoys himself a bit too much, and the bodies pile up. This comes in the backdrop of the assassination of Argol at the hands of Phaedus, and so assuming the mantle of Grand Regent, Frag's doctrine is to ensure that no sense of compassion or mercy can be found anywhere in Viltrumite's kind. This bloodbath is the solution, and when he orders it stopped, what we have left is an even more refined, more focused sense of brutality amongst Viltrumite kind. This is how we know that the remaining Viltrumites in present day are fully devoid of any sense of mercy and kindness, and so the stakes are raised when we do get to that final battle. And this battle takes place largely in space, with the Grand Coalition, Alan the alien, and his numerous allies that they have picked up along the way. You also get a on-surface confrontation between Frag and Nolan, where for one final time they try and convince each other of their newfound motives. But overall, I suspect I wasn't the only person thinking to myself, this is going a little bit too easily. The victory is coming without too much consequence. Yeah, there's a couple of casualties, and at the end, Phaedus does get his head ripped off, and so that's the end of him. But the entire planet Viltrum is destroyed. Our heroes fly into its core, causing a big volcanic eruption which literally blows up the planet. You might be thinking to yourself, really? For all of the Viltrum Empire's toughness? And it was that easy? But it's what comes next that I think is important, because you still have some remaining Viltrumites, and Frag, surprisingly enough, does exercise a small morsel of mercy by deciding not to kill Mark for the reason that he just simply does not want to see another Viltrumite die. Well, that's a U-turn. The small, minuscule handful of Viltrumites fly away, and the episode ends with the good guys pondering on what their next move might be until, shock horror, Mark clocks it. They are, of course, going to planet Earth. So you're still here watching this video. Thank you very much for sticking around this long. I now can officially declare that episode 8 of series 4 is my favourite episode of Invincible. You see, the way I got it figured, there are two types of final episode to a action, fantasy, sci-fi adventure series. The first is the epic showdown, the final boss, the big explosive culmination of everything that has been going on in the rest of the series. The second is the aftermath of the big epic spectacle. And this particular episode, it kind of does both at the same time. You see, as soon as Mark says that about the Viltrumites going to planet Earth, it immediately sends a chill down one's spine. We know how ruthless and cruel and ridiculously strong Viltrumites are, and now that their beloved planet has been destroyed, what do you think they are going to do to a small, weak little planet like planet Earth? And yet, we've already seen Earth get battered and bruised in the finale of Series 3, so are they really gonna do that again? Yes, the episode begins with Frag looking down on planet Earth, and the blood-hungry Viltrumites storm the planet, causing tsunamis, death, destruction, horror, in a whirlwind of chaos, and the entire planet is brought to flaming ruins, except it's not, because all of what we just saw was in Mark's head. This is the first of numerous visions that poor Mark is haunted by when he arrives at planet Earth. When he arrives, he finds that it's perfectly safe. The grass is green, the sky is blue, the buildings are upright, not a single Viltrumite attack anywhere. At numerous points in the episode, his train of thought is suddenly disrupted by these horrific prophetic visions of terrible things that happen to his family, loved ones, and associates. You can identify these sequences because his vision goes slightly blurry and wobbly when it happens, and so when this happened to his mum, I let out a big breath of relief to find that it was another thing in his head. So the next few didn't catch me out. The next one he has is when he sat with Eve on the roof of the house, and this one I thought was kind of funny because his vision is Frag popping Eve's head, which, yeah, is brutal in a sense, but is it really that much worse than what actually happens to her at the hands of Conquest at the end of Series 3, you know, when her lifeless body drops back on the roof next to him? I'm thinking to myself, yeah, she'll be alright. And then he has another one of these post-traumatic fake-outs when he's sat in a room with Cecil, at which point he takes on Cecil's offer of counselling. His mental state is finally starting to crack, and it is beautiful and heartbreaking in equal measures to see the very human reaction that Mark Grayson has now gone through. This is no longer the kid that got super excited at his powers whilst cleaning out the trash at the beginning of season 1. There is an earnest level of humanity to this journey, and this humanity is also on display when he reunites with Eve. Now, Eve has largely been out of the picture in this series, and one of the reasons for that is because you found out earlier on in the series that she was pregnant. Eve is not in a great place mentally. She is unhappy about her current physical appearance, and she is extremely guilty at having to confess to Mark that she had an abortion. But Mark, being the classy son of a gun he is, merely takes a second or two to process this information before taking Eve in his arms and feeling extreme sorrow and guilt that she went through all of that pain and heartache by herself. It really hammers home that Mark is the shining centerpiece of this entire story, even more so than Nolan himself. And I love the fact that Mark is this complete anomaly in the Invincible multiverse. By some strange quirk, he is really the Mark that should not be. In every other dimension, Mark is an evil, nasty git. In this one, he is one of the classiest, nicest fellas going. And the fact that he takes on Eve's burden and adds it to his own stresses just shows how much of a solid dude this young man is. And so amidst all of this, we also establish some of the things that are going to happen in Series 5, namely Debbie's decision to join Nolan back on the ship that also contains Oliver. This cements the prospect of somehow Debbie and Nolan rebuilding their relationship, which is going to be a very hard-fought prospect. But at this point in the story, all eyes are on Mark. For the entire episode, you're thinking to yourself, where are those damn dirty Viltrumites? And this culminates in Mark's little trip out. He flies up into the sky, into space, and then just free floats back down, washing himself away of all these troubles and all these burdens. And it was at this point that I was thinking to myself that Mark's main mission is probably the hardest mission of them all, and that's to somehow continue life with the fear that the Viltrumites are out there, to somehow wake up the next morning acknowledging that it's a brand new day and he has to carry on with life as anxious as he may feel about it. And then he has another vision, and this vision is of Frag floating in the sky just yards away from him, and Mark sees him, and you get the fake out wobbles again, and you're thinking to yourself, come on Mark, you can do it. It's just a vision. You can blinker it out. You can find a way to live. Once again, we're all rooting for yourself, Mark. And so he blinks the vision away, and the vision's still there because it's not a vision, it's actually Frag. They got me again. For the third time, they got me with these fake outs. It's a double bluff. It's actually Frag in the flesh, standing there. Mark throws a punch, does nothing, and then Frag does the unexpected, a little morsel of relief for us Earthlings. He, being a man of his word and is honest to a fault, assures Mark that he is going to do nothing to harm this little planet. But what he has done is ordered the Viltrumites to integrate themselves into everyday Earth life, posing as normal humans so they can procreate and rebuild the Viltrumite Empire on planet Earth from within. You see some of them there walking around in people clothes. You got Krieg treating himself to a ciggy and getting with a biker chick. Mark is then informed that any attempt to disrupt this brand brand new slow burning death of Earth will result in the quicker version of Earth's destruction that we saw at the beginning of this episode, and Mark is left with no choice but to accept these terms. There is something quite horrid about the fact that Frag also says to Mark, "You will never see me again." Okay, so his exact words were, "You will not hear from me again." Sorry. And so, any sense of resolution, any closure that Mark could have hoped for has now been fully denied to him. And that is the cliffhanger on which this series is left, alongside the fact that Alan has been handed over the mission to use the Scourge virus, thus destroying any and all Viltrumite, and that includes poor Mark and Oliver. Not one death, not one even small explosion, not a single exchange of even the mildest violence, except Mark attempting to punch Frag in the face. And therein lies the genius of this episode. It instills a chilling sense of despair in our main character and the viewer in an entirely different way. And I realised that to achieve this, to tell this kind of story, to weave this kind of narrative, is a lot tougher on a writing side than what they did in the end of Series 3. Instead, this episode is all about psychological warfare, committed to the one character who deserved it the least, and so we watch this poor guy's mind slowly break down from within. For an animation TV series to achieve this, I think is truly exceptional. The power of this episode, the power of this finale cannot be understated, and it is without doubt the most powerful bit of television that Invincible has created so far for my money. Like I said before, I could not be more grateful for not reading the comics and having no idea where this story is going to go next. And if this narrative continues to be that smart and unpredictable going forward, then Invincible will continue to be one of my favourite TV shows for a long time to come. This series knocked it out the park, and I'm very, very pleased with the end result. By my reckoning, its numerous other violent action superhero TV peers have got to work extremely hard to get on Invincible's level. Series 4 knocked it out the park. Anyway, that's enough of my waffle. Thank you very much for watching this video. Please get in the comments and tell me what you thought of Invincible Series 4. And if you want to check me out on social media, then please visit my Blue Sky page at thechosenchimp.bsky.social. You can also check out my Chosen Chimp YouTube channel, where I talk solely about the great institution that is Doctor Who. Until then, thanks once again for watching this video. I will see you next time, and in the meantime, have a good one.